Hey folks, welcome to another Water Trek 360. Today is part 2 of my 3-part series on apps that can help with video quality when diving with a smartphone. Check out my previous video on Staycam. Today we look at Beastcam. Again, these apps are for use with a housing that has a touchscreen like Divevolk. Housings like Sea Life, Kraken, and Hot Dive won't work. I started testing this app back in March in Catalina, then in the pool, and then most recently in Long Island Sound. Let's see how it did. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Beastcam is an app made by the folks at Beast Grip, who make add-ons for the iPhone, grips, anamorphic lenses, filters, rigs, etc. While topside photographers may not like that it doesn't have a gimbal interface, this was not an issue for me as I wouldn't be using a gimbal underwater anyway. It cost me $2 for the base app, $9 for the Pro Tools. I believe these have gone up slightly, but still under $14. The current version is still 1.19. As with Staycam, I concentrated on aspects important to me. Use with lenses, stabilization, and presets for focus and exposure. First, I tested each lens selection from the standard 24mm, then the 77mm telephoto, the 13mm ultra-wide, and finally the selfie. I also played with the zoom and the standard 2x zoom. Next, stabilization. I vigorously rocked the camera to see how extreme I could get with each mode. I did this with both the standard 24mm wide angle and the 13mm ultra wide. First is none. As you see, it did really nothing and the video matches pretty much the screen recording. In standard mode, there is some improvement, but there is still motion in the video. Cinematic, the highest, had the best impact on the aggressive shaking. This would be my default going forward. Next, I played with manual focus. This was something I would use primarily for still photos. While it worked well in pool tests, I had limited success in open water, where changes in the water column, visibility, and subject matter was constantly changing. Next, I played with white balance. You have a bunch of presets to choose from to make it quick and easy if you don't want to set it yourself manually. This is great if the sky changes while you're diving and you can adjust. The ability to change your ISO is also a nice feature. You have to be careful here though. Subtle changes should really be all you need. I really wanted to test the smart exposure feature. This could be helpful in darker conditions like when you penetrate a wreck. This particular sequence was shot at dusk, roughly 8 p.m. You don't need to change it a lot to get immediate results in brightening the image. This one-stop process auto-changes both ISO and shutter speed together. However, in extremely low light, smart exposure did not work as well as I had hoped. This clip was shot at roughly 9:30 p.m. I still needed a strobe. My next set of tests were around video quality. I primarily wanted to see how 4K videos did in beast mode with each of the encoding methods. First, I did a baseline with HDR at 8-bit. It defaulted to 68 MPS bitrate, and it had the standard color profile. Each of the next 4K videos were in beast mode. Here, I used 8-bit. The data rate was 160 as advertised at an HEVC codec and the HD 1-1-1 color profile. Then 10-bit, which pushes you down to 30 FPS and a 130 bitrate. The color again was HEVC with the HD 1-1-1. Next was 10-bit HDR. This dropped the bitrate to 53 and then obviously changed the color profile to BT 2020 HLG, which is 19-18-9. This is the same as Apple's if you set your video to 4K 60 FPS and HDR video on. Finally, ProRes with 422 HQ. The bitrate was huge at 1782, as was the file size. Oddly, it pushed the codec down to HD 1-1-1. With ProRes on Apple, you're limited to 30 FPS, but the codec stays as the BT 2020 HLG 9-18-9. Next up is a highly detailed 12-minute tutorial covering all settings. If you want to come back to that later, just skip ahead to the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to start with the little gear icon in the lower left. We'll come back to this occasionally as we cover other settings along the way. Here you can set the camera controls you want to use. Whether you want to operate in manual mode, load default setups, control screen and zoom locks. Under interface, you can control vertical and horizontal orientation. You can hide icons. Under File Management, you can change how and where you want to save your files, retaining a digital slate, saving to your camera roll, doing geotagging, etc. You can shop for gear, linking to product specials. You can also get support help, report an issue, and check your version number. Next up is the microphone. This is not as important underwater. These will vary depending on the phone you are using. You can choose which microphone you want to use. Topside, you can add an external mic as well in the format you want. My phone only has one sample rate. The next icon is the phone's built-in light. I would never use this feature underwater, but it's there if you want to. The next important section is the film quality selection, covering resolution, frame rate, bit rate, and encoding profile. Frame rate is dependent upon which resolution you can choose. HD or Full HD, each giving you up to 240 FPS. Quad HD gives you up to 30 FPS, and 4K up to 60. Quality selection, or bit rate, ranges from 30 MPS when in low, 70 in standard, 100 in high, and Beast, which pops you up all the way to 160 MPS. Then you have encoding method. You have 8-bit, 10-bit, 10-bit HDR, and ProRes for Apple users. Encoding method can also change your available frame rate depending upon your resolution. If you shoot ProRes, be aware your file sizes will be huge. Next up is lens selection, where you can choose any of the available cameras, including selfie. The zoom settings seem to be the same focal length as a 13mm ultra-wide, so I'm not really sure what that is doing. In the upper left is the general menu. Digital Slate allows you to create projects and scenes that will be saved in discrete folders inside the Beastcam library. On the right, there is a brightness slider to control the viewing screen's brightness. As mentioned, Beastcam makes external anamorphic lenses for topside use. You can set which one you are using. I will leave a link for the Beastcam website. Below that is where you set stabilization mode. You have off, standard, and cinematic. Next are guides. You have a horizon level. You have your grids for rule of thirds, nice function. You also have aspect ratio portion. This will crop your video as a guide, not on your final film, unless you tap crop on in the lower right. Along the top, you have your current settings, what stabilization mode, resolution, FPS, and encoding you're using, as well as the video timer, length of the active video, storage use on your phone, and available battery. This turns green if you're actively charging. Before we head to the right side of the screen, let's look at the center of the screen. You have two reticles. The round one is for exposure and the square one is focus. They're positional, so you can place them over the area you want to base your exposure or focusing on. Simply tap on them to lock the function, which turns the outline blue. To unlock, tap it again. By tapping and holding, they will expand to the center and use the overall exposure and focus. Doing this in reverse by pressing and holding the reticle will reset them. There is also a feature called gesture control. If you use a finger and thumb or two fingers and pinch in and out, it will alter your zoom. If you slide a finger left or right horizontally, it will change your focus. If you slide a finger up and down vertically, it will change exposure. Again, to reset, just tap the reticle. It will change from blue to white and go back to the original setting. With the touchscreen housing, I chose to shut this off in base settings to avoid issues with accidental touches underwater. As we move to the right, next is the circle with the M in it. This is quick zoom. This zoom is dependent upon which zoom settings you chose under the initial settings icon. You have zoom 1 through 10, and whether the zoom is preview only or part of the actual video. Not sure why you would set to preview only unless you're never planning on using a zoom in any video. Jumping ahead, the next icon is the quick 2x icon. This gives a set 2x magnification on demand if needed. This option is only available if you're using the standard 24mm wide-angle lens. The next icon is for Beastcam presets. You need to log in. It's easy to create an account. Just give an email and a password. This is a great way to set up as many presets as you need for any condition: night diving, blue water, green water, deep wrecks, and set any one of them as your default. We move to screen lock. If you have this setting turned on in base settings, it allows you to lock screen icons, with the exception of quick zoom, 2x zoom, visual analytics, and gallery, unless you tap unlock again. With a touchscreen housing underwater, this is helpful to prevent accidental parameter changes. We move on to visual analytics tools. These are standard tools to help improve video setup. You tap to use, tap to unuse. Focus peaking. Neon green means those items are well in focus as your benchmark. Tap the focus reticle to undo. Zebra mode shows exposure levels. Red means overexposed. Blue means underexposed. These are sometimes called clipped highlights or clipped shadows. False color measures exposure. Multicolor green means good, correctly exposed. Blue means underexposed. Orange, overexposed. Try to get as much green as you can. To undo, tap Exposure Reticle. Auto mode turns on focus peaking and zebra tools automatically when you adjust focus and exposure manually. This might be useful to you if you like these tools. Again, tap the Exposure Reticle to undo. Next is the standard record icon, which changes to a square with a red border around the viewing screen when recording. There is another variant to this called stitch recording. You need to turn this on in base settings, where you can pause the video, and when you restart it, it will stitch the video to the previous video and save them as one instead of multiple files within Beastcam. The caveat here is that stitch recording will not work in 10-bit HDR. To get it to close the video as one, long press the record icon to close out StitchCam for those videos. Underneath that, you can choose video or photo mode. In base settings, you can set photo shutter to use the volume buttons. But when you're using an underwater housing, this is useless, so I have it turned off. In photo mode, virtually all settings and modes are the same. You can change resolution, ratio, and format. HEIF offers better compression than JPEG, so it uses less storage space on your devices and iCloud. Under Photo, RAW defaults to the 48 megapixel DNG file, so these images can be huge, even though they're compressed. You have access to all the lenses and have timer functions. On the right, you have sound levels, showing decibel level on the left and right microphone if recording in stereo. These are the same if in mono. Top shows the current decibel level, and the bottom shows which microphone is in use, the recording mode, and sample rate. Again, this is of limited use for me underwater. On the extreme lower right is the gallery, Beastcam's internal camera roll. Here you can view photos and videos saved. Tapping one brings up a selection. You can select multiple files to move to a new or existing project or folder. You can download them to camera roll or delete them. File information is available as well to view. You can tag this as prioritized for an easy selection, which puts an asterisk at the beginning of the file name to speed up the sorting process after download. You can do this as well real-time after the video is saved with a pop-up that's selected in base settings. You can do the same thing manually. You have the option to select all videos, and you can share to your desired social media platform. This brings us to the primary video settings: white balance, focus, zoom, ISO, shutter speed, and manual exposure. Each of these settings will change from white to blue numbers if altered. White balance gives you several options: daylight at 5200 Kelvin with a 5.0 tint or tungsten, cloudy at 6000 K and a 4.0 tint, shade at 7000, tungsten at 3200 K with 0 tint, fluorescent 4000 K with a 30 tint, and gray card, which I seldom use and would do post-production anyway. Both Kelvin and tungsten settings can be set manually. You can change white balance using the vertical slider bar. Once selected, it locks the setting to blue. You can set presets up to 3 value settings if you wish. To undo this, simply tap the exposure reticle. Hold on a specific preset value to remove it if you wish. There's also a timer control as to how quickly white balances change, from 0 to 10 seconds. For manual focus, use the slider for desired focus. Numbers in reticle will turn blue again if you've manually set them. Here too, you can set up 3 values and have a timer function as well. To unlock, tap the focus reticle. Manual zoom works the same way. Use the slider to create up to 3 set values if you want. Remove them with a long touch, and reset to auto by tapping the focus reticle. The next 3 are joined at the hip, so to speak: ISO, shutter speed, and manual exposure. If you change one setting, the other most likely will change. Manual exposure is mutually exclusive from ISO and shutter speed. If you change that, they both also change. You'll see they all turn blue if one setting is changed. Again, use the slider to increase, decrease settings. You can switch this to smart exposure by altering in your base settings. This is a quick, simple way to play with exposure and keep the two in sync. Tap the exposure reticle to undo. So, to end this tutorial section, you see near the lower left is your histogram, giving you a graphical look at your shadows, midtones, highlights, etc. Here are a few tips for video I found through trial and error. Since things change rapidly underwater, you'll want to prevent accidental changes. Enable and use screen lock, preventing fat fingering. I might lock exposure, but maybe not focus. I do not lock orientation in settings. It makes it easier to close the app when it's in vertical display while it's in the housing. The video stays horizontal in normal use anyway. Set gesture controls off. This is difficult to use with a touch housing anyway. I set low default setting to on and make a few presets, and it'll make your life easier. Set quick zoom to zoom, not preview only. I set stitched recorded video to off. I can always combine videos after, and it further segments any testing I'm doing. Also, if this setting is off, you don't have to check to see if it's paused as a video or if it's actually off. If you're going to use AirDrop, make sure you set all photos data option to on. I also use the grid for rule of thirds. As an added note, if you long press the app icon before opening Beastcam, you can choose how you want to start the app to open: last setting, default, or photo mode. Lastly, if you are shooting in extremely low light without a strobe, use the 24mm standard lens, not the 13mm ultra wide. The light metering is different. So the good. Overall, I had pretty good success. It's cheap, it's under $15 one-time cost, pretty minimal for so many features, and no subscription fees. It has a wide variety of presets that are easy to change, and you have up to 3 additional settings for most manual settings. The stabilization in cinematic mode was pretty good. I do think Steadicam was a little better. Also, if you shoot topside, it has quite a few accessories to play with, anamorphic lenses, filters, etc. You can shoot in 10-bit or 10-bit HDR, auto showing what options are available to you. If you're into photography versus videography, you can use the 48 megapixel RAW setting. While shooting in 8-bit, Beast mode can give you up to 160 MBS in 4K. I really like the smart exposure, simultaneously adjusting ISO and shutter speed and overall exposure. This feature is useful if you're in a hurry, but remember not to overuse it. The color was good, and post-production there was less adjustments for me to make. And the bad. There's no gimbal interface, but I really wouldn't be using that underwater anyway. The app screen interface is much busier than Stacam, but you can hide most icons if it really annoys you. There are no log profiles available, no geotag on video, only on photo. There's no auto load to the camera roll for video, only for photos. There's no time lapse, no cinematic mode. Digital zoom is really grainy, so I would keep this to a max of 4 at best. You can't auto reset the timer. You must dial it back to 0. This is annoying. And it's only usable with a touch screen housing. While the 160 MBS bitrate setting of Beast was listed as a good, you only get that rate when you shoot in 8-bit. If you want higher than that, then shoot in ProRes. Finally, the ugly. There are only a couple of items here. It's iPhone only at this juncture. With any other smartphone, to my knowledge, you're out of luck. The reticles are hard to see when locked, depending upon the background. In blue water, they simply disappear into the background, and I couldn't see where they were. There are also a few quirky things here, which took me a while to figure out since there was little documentation on the app itself. The quick 2x icon is only for the standard 24mm lens, so it disappears. If you are set to 10-bit HDR, the visual effects tools are not available, the histogram disappears for some reason, and StitchCam doesn't work. If you're shooting in 10-bit, there is no 60 FPS setting, only up to 30 FPS. While these aren't hugely ugly, they were very annoying, and it wasted a lot of my time to understand why. Well, this was a long review. If you're still watching, thank you very much. I am not paid by nor represent Beastcam or BeastGrip. Money spent on any product is my own. This is my opinion based on real-world usage. I'm not doing a comparative review here. I might do that after I finish Cinema P3, but I liked Beastcam better than Stacam. There are situations, though, I would not use Beastcam, especially if I needed to control depth of field post-production. I would use the iPhone's base camera app, as with slow-mo or time-lapse. That said, Beastcam has a huge uplift. It gives you the ability to control your camera in a way that Apple doesn't, especially under extreme conditions of depth and, say, darkness. It has a variety of functions, ease of use, multi-level customization on many settings, and most importantly, quality of results. I give it a thumbs up. If you are using an underwater touchscreen housing, get this app. I'm sold. Anyway, I'm working on a video for some underwater lights that I've purchased, so stay tuned for that. I'm also working on a video for some tray options with the Divevolk housing and some more rec videos. So, my friends, as always, please stay safe in your dive adventures, and as always, go explore, get wet.